Hello, and today we're thinking videos and using videos in class. Now, we've all used videos in classes, but with higher level students, there's a temptation to use more lecture-y style videos, so our thoughts naturally turn to things like TED Talks. But how do we use them in the most effective way? So I spoke to Roger Fusselman after his KOTESOL conference lecture on using TED Talks, and he gave us some advice, some do's, some don'ts, and a framework for how we can actually set up our lessons. So let's get straight into it. All right, so we're going to talk about TED, using TED.
That's right.
Right, and kind of a lot of teachers use it, but maybe not in the best way. Do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I haven't really seen a teacher use TED before.
Right.
I've seen lesson plans from others on TED, but what I've seen in terms of a concept of what it was about was a particular textbook and how they scaffolded things. It's the kind of thing where you're very tempted to do strictly listening or reading comprehension with some activities,
Right.
like your standard approach to any particular text.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way a lot of people go into it. My guess is that on the whole, most teachers that do it as a passion and are into it, and therefore the results are probably good most of the time. And that they go through some growing pains where they make mistakes and it was too high or it was too low or they chose the wrong task, things like that.
Sure, yeah. I think the times I've seen it used, it was almost entirely kind of fill in the blanks kind of activities or vocab, basically, vocab building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so your approach to this, what is it based on? Is there some kind of foundation that you started with?
Well, this was first a requirement by my employer to teach this particular course.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, TED, that sounds interesting. And my attitude about teaching is there's a product that's created by the student. Now, it may be a conversation, maybe an essay, it may be a project, it could be all kinds of things. It could be just a simple conversation between people on a particular topic. Some form of application. Presumably the people of TED made that to create change in one way or another and not simply to hear themselves talk or to have accessible content.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That we go to movies and we listen to things and we read books and all these kinds of things with an end outside of the movie, outside of the book, and outside the TED Talk.
I see. So kind of what is your approach to it and how do you...
I want to see how they apply it. I want to build to the application. So in general, I'm not that worried about making sure that they understood the whole thing. I think in some cases there are interesting tidbits that need to be focused on. And those tidbits are what can make for an interesting conversation or an interesting insight that they can use or apply or an interesting project. For example, there's a very short TED Talk called How to Start a Movement, and it's like 3 minutes long. It's one of these shorter ones that you can learn a bit from, that you can enjoy pretty quickly, and you can go through it and do other things. But at the end, I'm wondering, okay, let's have students start a movement. Let's have them brainstorm based on the feedback and apply the concepts. And in that particular TED Talk, you have to think about what is the role of the leader and what is the role of the follower. And it's not strictly a top-down thing. That a lot of times the first follower, the protege, is the one who is the person learned from. And the leader, as we strictly call him, probably sets the terms and conditions. And so having that kind of dynamic and building an activity around that dynamic is important. And I can't say that the activity that I came up with was effective. I remember it not working so well, but at the end of the day, you want them to take this information and use it, and they'll remember it more and they'll appreciate the course more.
Right. Yeah, is that the one, or have I confused two videos where it talks about the first follower is actually the strongest person?
Yes, that's exactly the one.
Is that the one where it's one guy dancing at a music
Yeah,
festival?
yeah. In the video, there's one guy dancing, and he's shirtless, and then another guy gets up and dances, and you can see in the video because the presenter understood how it was a metaphor for something. He took something visual and turned it into a metaphor. And that alone is a reason to show a talk, that someone would take something visual like that and use it. And that inspired me. Someday I want to do a presentation about leadership involving this image of goats on this sheet of aluminum metal. And you could see these goats working together. Get sure they get on top of the sheet of metal, and they're swaying back and forth on top of the metal. It's a little hard to see on the radio per se, but it's the kind of thing where you can look at that and you know there probably is a metaphor for leadership in this video, even though all the players are goats. and so it can get you thinking as a teacher as to, great, I have this goat video. I want to use it, but I'm not sure when. It's like having a throwing star at the police department.
Right.
I want to pull it out sometime, and I'm waiting for whatever crowd control situation would require it.
Right. So is there some kind of framework that you follow when planning or using a video?
It depends on the video. Certain videos need to be edited out. You need to focus on just certain bits. For example, there's one video called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And that video has Sir Ken Robinson doing this kind of rambling speech. There's a lot of filler, a lot of Crisco in there. It's great for native speakers, but for non-native speakers, you have to pick and choose. And you feel bad because he has a lot of good points. And you don't necessarily show them all the bits. And I will tend to think productively always, that getting them to do something with it is what matters. And I will pre-teach vocabulary if I think it's pretty dense, or I might skip the whole thing if I think it goes on forever. But if I think it's important for them to have exposure to a text, let's say it's an academic text where we did this study and we went through this process, and if the video shows the visualization of that process on PowerPoint, all these guys use PowerPoints, then I will consider showing that bit and not necessarily skipping it. So you have to prepare them insofar as they need to understand what they need to understand, not that they understand the whole thing. And you always give them the transcript at the end. Always.
Oh, at the end, not at the beginning?
Well, if they've gone through the tasks, if you've scaffolded it enough, your goal as a teacher should be that they can take in the text, understand the important things of the text, answer correctly certain questions without having to look that closely at a transcript and without subtitles or what's it called? Captions. Right. That you want them to get it strictly through sound and through the visual cues of the person speaking, because that's where they'll live their lives English-wise.
Yeah, it's more authentic.
Yeah, it's more authentic. And
you don't hand out a script before you speak to somebody, for example.
Right. And the idea of the transcript is so they can take it home, read it, digest it, understand it, do whatever they want with it. I don't push homework in the kind of courses that I have, because these courses are non-credit. They tend to have small numbers of students, maybe 4 or 5 in some cases. So it could be kind of an intimate setting. In a more credit-based, then I might give homework where they have to listen to it beforehand or exploit it afterwards in some way.
Okay. So you'd mentioned before about when you choose a video, it's all aimed towards application. Do the students get a say in what they do?
Yeah, they do. This month, I finally figured that out. My brain was not there for some reason. I think with all the work you put into it, in doing the scaffolding, making the materials, you find yourself wanting to control as many variables as possible. But this time, I gave them a list of 10 videos, And I said, vote for your top 3, and they chose their top 3. And so we've already done the top 3. And there's one video I want to do that's a good closer for our month-long semesters. All our semesters are 1 month, exactly the calendar month, from the 1st to the 30th or 31st, depending on the month. And so, yeah, you give them as many choices as possible. That's an important bedrock of teaching, choice. You don't necessarily number your conversation questions 1, 2, 3, 4, because they'll think, okay, I have to do none first, I have to do number 2 second. You make it clear they can jump around most likely if there's no logical hierarchy to the order you have those questions in.
So you'd choose maybe 10 videos that would you prepare them as classes first, or just give them the choice?
I'd give them a choice, and then I prepare them. My semester load isn't that big, so I think as I go along and as I repeat things, or as I have to repeat things, then it becomes a little bit easier. But sometimes success does you in. Gone through all the videos with this group, they've re-enrolled for the next month or the next 2 months. I'm out of videos, and it's supposed to be a TED class. So I'm going to go to the website, find some more videos. Yeah.
Is it only TED that you use? Are there any other sites you
well, there's different kinds of TEDs. There's the regular TED.com. There's TEDx, which tends to be independently done TED Talks. And I've done one of those. There's another one I wanted to do, something on time management, but I skipped that. And there's TED Ed. And when I've talked with people at a conference about it, there's a couple people that were using TED Ed, which tend to be shorter, more animated. It's a little harder to build a 90-minute class around them because there's not that much, unless you go through it in a more fine-tooth comb, which I haven't yet. But that possibility is certainly out there. And as I'm sure your listeners know, a lot of these TEDs already have the transcript, already have the scaffolding to a certain degree, but they don't have comprehension questions, warm-ups, application activities built in. And that's the teacher's job as a resource generator at that point.
So what kind of activities have you used with it then? So thinking beyond just like fill in the blanks or vocab checking, what are some of the activities that you can do?
Sometimes you can provide almost all the text in isolated words, and give them the context and situation, and they can build a dialogue or a story based on that. For example, Ken Robinson, again, in Do Schools Kill Creativity, he brings up a story about a young girl in an art class, and it goes really fast, and it's a really interesting story, and I really wanted my students to get that story, because number one, it was a joke, number two, it was comprehensible, but alas, Ken Robinson's delivery was very crisp, clear, clean, and fast. So I wanted to give them all the vocabulary, have them come up with their own idea of where the story's going to go, and then share their results with other students. And when they did that, a lot of times they'd get a lot of the material right. And then you go back and you can compare, okay, how close were you? And some people might be closer than others. Right. And the vocabulary there was pretty simple, pretty direct. The story was really quick, and I felt that if they were going to comprehend it without subtitles and without captions, that therefore I should prepare as many bits as possible. My overall view of comprehension in these is we're not shooting for anything too difficult. In some cases, fill in the blank makes a lot of sense if it's a key term or if it's an important concept. Right. In other cases, you might have the whole text in front of them, but the sentences may not be in order, and that they'll have to put them in order first and then check. So there's different possibilities there. A lot of times, the speech itself, like I said before, will suggest a production activity. There's one called Before I Die. And Before I Die is about this huge wall where you're right, before I die, I want to ... And basically it's sort of a giant bucket list wall, and they've had some in Seoul and one in Pohang and all around the world. And there's supplemental material available about this outside the talk. And so I was able to find a list of some of these and you say, okay, which ones do you like? Which ones appeal to you? To give them a sense of the kind of possibilities that were open to them. You know, how they could cut loose if they wanted, how they could zero in on something, how whatever 5 they came up with, you know, for this potential bucket list, they had a lot of freedom to come up with what they wanted. And so, yeah, you want them on some degree to think the way the speaker thinks and to get inside the speaker's mind. And this particular TED Talk was fairly short, about 5 minutes. It's pretty direct. I'm actually doing it tomorrow with students, and it was a good one for discussing your future, and therefore a good one to end a program on or a course on.
Right. Yeah. And much better than the usual kind of future kind of classes that you can do.
Yeah. Where you tell me about your summer vacation, your winter, what do you have planned, etc. And they get the sense of at the end that maybe this was important. Maybe they don't say that, but they get a sense that maybe this was important, and that these ideas are important. Maybe I should go back. Right. And now there's an app. There's an app for everything now. There's probably an app for me. Right. That's being sold, and I don't get any money for it.
Listen to me, we're already on it.
Yeah. And so now that's available too. I have 9 principles, and I'm trying to remember these. Like a challenge, you want to challenge them. You want it to be meaningful. Right. But you also want to support what's going on. It's very easy to under-support, and I think it's better to over-support than under-support, because at the end of the day, it's comprehension issue isn't so important. What's important is that they're able to do something in that class with it. Right. I'm very big on in-class experiences. There's that. I'm trying to remember some of those others. There's choice. You want to give them choice to navigate that. There's integration. You want them to connect ideas together. And a few others where these were ideas that they're probably common with a lot of your listeners about, you know, teaching in general. And so anytime that you could go outside of the regular classroom experience, anytime that you can make it something real to them rather than something listening comprehension to them, I think is totally fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I had principles essentially like that. Okay. Yeah.
So have you found, because obviously if you're teaching month to month, you've probably used quite a lot of videos. Did any of them absolutely bomb or just go way over the students' heads?
Yeah. There was one I did where I think it could have worked, but what I had set up wasn't enough scaffolding for it. It was about happiness, which is unfortunate because that seems like an important topic.
It's fairly universal.
Yeah, fairly universal. That one, I think if I had confined it to particular bits of the video rather than the whole video, it would have been more effective. Sometimes you have to scale back and just pick one bit or another bit. So that didn't work so well. There's one that some of these require some endurance. You'll listen for 2 minutes to get this bit, and you'll listen another 2 minutes to get this bit. But usually they've worked out pretty well. There was one I do not recommend unless you're willing to put in about 10 hours to do it. I did one called the Museum of 4 in the Morning. And I did that on purpose because it was ending with something poetic, and I was going to pick and choose bits anyway, and I wanted my students to go through it. And luckily it worked, but I chose it, and I knew I was going to do it for a month ahead of time. I knew I was going to do it, so it was in the back of my mind. It took a long time to plan, and I brought in poetry, I had conversations, etc. So this was a fairly serious class in terms of the level for that particular video. And by that time, they'd have other exposure to it. It was the end of the semester. I give them a poem to kind of end the semester on that reminds them of things. And so it worked in a way that it worked for that class. But something, and didn't fit it, the video didn't fit other categories. And so a lot of it was creating variety. That's another one of the principles, variety. A lot of it was just creating variety for them because they had done different types of videos. They'd done science, they'd done personal observations, they'd done psychology, they'd done things like that.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it took me in a good direction. But basically, a lot of these videos, you can tell if you watch the video ahead of time, no, that's not going to fly. I've seen videos by people that I like. I thought that's great. I would totally use that. But then I thought, no, I wouldn't. It has a message that's a little too much out there, or it's something I agree with, but it's not an aspect of anything I'd bring into the classroom. Sometimes you don't necessarily shoot stuff down because of the content, or well, maybe you do. Yeah, so I'll get into a video in about a minute. I'll go if it's good or not. And if I get to a point where I think that's stupid, I'll go, oops. Well, that 15 minutes I'll never get back.
That's not too much.
Yeah.
Is it?
Choice, variety, meaning, support, challenge, integration, application. That we definitely do want to apply these things. By support, we of course mean scaffolding. Right. And understanding it's better to over scaffold than under scaffold. But yeah, application, definitely. There's a video about what's it called? Your body language dictates who you are, or your body language creates who you are, something like that. And in the video, at the end, you're supposed to do these power poses. They're Wonder Woman pose, a kind of desk pose where you have your fingers like a general on the desk, and these are supposed to raise your positivity, endorphins, things of that sort. So I will have them do it in class, and I know other teachers that have taught that particular, who've done the same thing. So that's by no means original. But yeah, it's you can get, the danger is people can get lost in the text and not understand that the text is not the goal. It's the day after the text that we care. So what's the day after aspect? So yeah, you kind of have to see it a little bit artistically, and figure out what activity will lead to it. Yeah.
All right. So I guess in that sense, any kind of do's and don'ts about using them that we haven't covered already?
Yeah. Let's start with some don'ts. Don't always do the same kind of task to prepare them. Don't think you have to explain every single word. That's difficult. Don't think it has to be a listening. It could be a reading in certain cases. Don't think you have to do the whole video. Don't think you have to focus on any particular skill. You could mix the skills together. Don't think I'll always use multiple choice or always use fill in the blank. Don't think you have to use the PowerPoint for everything, because a lot of times what happens is in the rhythm of the classroom, you will get trapped behind this podium or lectern, I should say, where your computer is and the screen is and other things. And you kind of want to be out there too. So if you overuse PowerPoint, the rhythm of the class will be thrown off. Right. So it'll be very technology laden. And unless you're super smooth with technology, and they are too, it's going to feel a little bit teacher loaded. So you want to be more human and do things largely through handouts, except when you need more scaffolding that shouldn't be on the handout. Okay. Yeah. So those are the things I would think of offhand as advice.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I guess any closing thoughts on it? Any final kind of thoughts on this?
Good question. There are other sources for this. There's Big Think. There's a channel called Ideacity. And these sources might see the world a little bit differently, and there might be a little bit of a different text type. So you may want to consider them. There is a website called bigthink.com. I'd be interested in applying it, but I think it's going to be a little bit difficult. They tend to speak a little bit faster, be a little bit more off the cuff, and so I'd recommend that for a higher level than the typical TED Talk listener in class. I also recommend talking with me, contacting me. If something works, that'd be great. Great to hear about it. But and also don't get too wrapped up in the ones that you like to do. Have a variety to the different kinds of talks. You're going to have one or two students somewhere that need exposure or want exposure to something scientific that you think is dry. So I planned something for insects one time based on that, because that was an interesting topic that you could do metaphorically aside from the strict scientific stuff, because it got in mating rituals and things like that. So have fun with it, and always remember to be supportive with the student, and they will appreciate it, and they'll think that they've developed their own creativity, because you may get I feel more creative now as positive feedback for the course.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Good stuff.
You're welcome.